Now I'm going to change and give you some good news about youth community action. Linked to a larger Indigenous youth social movement around the world, youth are putting together suicide prevention programs for themselves. The communities are taking responsibility for suicide prevention. They've started. I'll tell you about Kikitaujoak. The suicides, they stopped for like 4 years. What happened there, I talked to the deputy mayor. He said that he and some other Inuit decided to have the Inuit meet in the only public place they had, which was a gym in the basement of their Hamlet Council house, the government house. There was a gym. It was the only big place for people to meet as a large group. So they had people there every week or two to talk about suicide prevention. What can we do to help each other? So they did that. They talked. They said, yeah, we need to spend time with people who are looking sad. We need to talk to each other. You know, we need to be with our young people. And then a second group, the housing committee, they were an Inuit group in charge of all the houses. The houses were all public. Nobody owned their house, So what they did was they took the closet rod out of every closet in the house. They removed the suicide method. It's kind of like gun control here, which we don't want, right? Well, that was their version of gun control. They got rid of the closet rods in every house. They didn't care what they did with their clothes. So between those two things, the suicides pretty much stopped for all those years. Igloolik, by the way, in these two projects, in each community they had a youth committee. And they had a lot of youth committees in a lot of these communities in Nunavut, where young people organized themselves to do good things for young people in their community. So we worked very closely on this project with the two youth committees. They were involved with helping us put the questions together, you know, gathering the data, etc., letting the community know about the project. So when we finished in Igloolik, the president of their youth committee, he decided to reorganize their youth committee. He got a bunch of new young people together to do something for suicide prevention. They decided that they wanted to open a youth center where young people could go. So Zach Kunuk, the film director, his company helped them get some money, and to the Hamlet Council, the government house, they ended up getting a house for the youth center. So the youth opened up the youth center, they ran it, they were there every afternoon and evening. They had a pool table, they had games, they had a big television screen for movie night. They invited elders to come in and talk about culture, about language. They even started a little kind of peer counseling network in the high school where kids would help other kids. Well, 2 years later, they had no suicides. The community actually celebrated that. However, because the youth were in charge of the money, they screwed up, they lost their money, they had to close the center. So the center closed. Over the next 8 years, the suicides came back with a vengeance. A lot of young people were killing themselves. That's when I moved up there for a year. And that was my second dissertation, actually, at McGill University. And I moved into that house. I connected with the next generation of youth committee. They were called the Society, they had a name. Their primary goal was to reopen the youth center. So I was meeting with them. They were meeting at one kid's house, but then that kid dropped out. They had nowhere to meet. So I said, you guys want to meet at my house? I had this little house. I said, we can meet there every week. So every Friday they came over, they met at that house. They spoke a mix of English and Inuktitut, and I was learning their language a bit, so I was able to understand them. I wasn't actually helping them, but they were actually organizing to reopen the youth center. It took them quite a while, a number of months. I found that there were government grant programs, both federal and territorial, that we could apply for grants, because they needed money. And the grants were they were mainly for something cultural. So my friend Nata, who you saw, the actor, and we organized all the youth in the community to come together. And we had a big meeting at my house. Nata brought some Arctic char, some fish. I always made hot chocolate for the youth that came. And we talked to the youth. We said, okay, we want to put a youth center together. We have money. We can do cultural things with this money. So what kind of things do you want to see in the youth center? So they started making suggestions. We ended up with 26 ideas. 26. So then I met with the youth committee, or later. There were about 6 or 7 of them, maybe 8. And me. And we organized those 26 ideas into 3 themes. We applied for grants. I think there were 4 grants we applied for. They got all of them. One of them was for an adult to be sort of the director in charge of the money. So the president was 17 years old. You don't want to have a 17-year-old in charge of the money. So they hired a director, and she was great. They reopened the youth center. It was packed with youth every night. And the suicides went down. 8 years after they opened it, compared to the 8 prior years, suicides went down 68% in that one community. And the community knew that the youth center was doing something. And the youth were actually really honored by the police, by the schools, by the government that was running the community. So the youth were actually seen very positively. They actually were doing something to prevent suicide. And it was working. This is a picture of that youth committee, the second one that opened the youth center the second time. And they had these packages because they were the opening of the youth center was going to be a big celebration in the community. So here's a picture of the opening of the youth center. They're throwing the candies off the roof to the children. The whole community was out there. It was a really big celebration. The Inuit had a number of posters that I took some photos of. Stay alive. Suicide is not the Inuit way. Survive your problems. Which is interesting. Suicide is not the Inuit way. There was another poster. I didn't take a photo of it. But it said something like, suicide is a white thing. Don't do it. We never used to do this. So stop it. This is a white thing. And here's another one. Inuit values and beliefs, know them. Okay, the culture is really important. So this is part of what I call reclamation and control. They're reclaiming control over their lives. They're doing it by running their own government, all the way down to youth committees doing suicide prevention. The communities are starting to take control over their lives, which they had lost through the government colonialism. I call it indigenized suicide prevention. But you can do this with any group, not just Native Americans or Indigenous peoples. Any group can do this. They're having suicide prevention programs, and the youth are heavily involved in all 4 of the regions of Canada. I won't go into any details. Nunavut has a Nunavut Task Force on Suicide. They have an organization called Embrace Life Council, who my friend Lori was the director of. They are for suicide prevention. What they are doing is bringing communities together on the internet, on like Zoom and things like that, so they can talk to each other, to talk about what each community is doing to prevent suicide so they can help each other. In Nunavik, they have a Septuagint Youth Association. The youth travel by kayak to different communities to put on workshops on suicide prevention for young people. This is young people doing it for young people. Pretty amazing.